Pennsylvania Congressman Guy Reschenthaler tells me that he and his GOP colleagues have the numbers to replace Liz Cheney. That vote could happen early Wednesday, shortly after the House returns from recess. Reschenthaler says there's a large coalition in the House backing Liz Stefanik for GOP conference chair, including Whip Steve Scalise, but that coalition stretches much farther to the most influential person in the party.
I am honored to support President Trump for re-election.
Stefanik endorsing Trump then, now he's returning the favor. Trump taking to his website to write, quote, Liz Cheney is a warmongering fool who has no business in Republican Party leadership. We want leaders who believe in the Make America Great Again movement and prioritize the values of America first. Liz Stefanik is a far superior choice, and she has my complete and total endorsement for GOP conference chair. Liz is a tough and smart communicator. She quickly replied saying, quote, thank you, President Trump, for your 100% support for House GOP conference chair. We are unified and focused on firing Pelosi and winning in 2022. Stefanik is seen by many as a rising star in the party, a 36-year-old from the blue state of New York and a vocal supporter of President Trump, known for her efforts to recruit Republican women candidates. Many are now her House colleagues. But some of Trump's supporters argue that while Liz Cheney needs to be replaced, Stefanik isn't the best choice, pointing out her voting record during the Trump presidency was less in line with the president's than Cheney's. The conservative PAC Club for Growth says, quote, Liz Stefanik is not a good spokesperson for the House Republican Conference. She's a liberal with a 35% Club for Growth lifetime rating, fourth worst in the House GOP. House Republicans should find a conservative to lead messaging and win back the House majority. And the conservative advocacy group Freedom Works says, quote, if House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is looking for a conservative to replace Liz Cheney, then we suggest taking a look at our congressional scorecard. Representative Stefanik has a dismal 37% score on Freedom Works scorecard. But Cheney is determined to go out fighting, firing back at Trump's endorsement and criticism in a new Washington Post op-ed, writing in part, quote, Republicans need to stand for genuinely conservative principles and steer away from the dangerous and anti-democratic Trump cult of personality. Republican Devin Nunes, ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, says Cheney is playing a losing hand.
A Republican placed something in the Washington Post, which, by the way, is owned by a tech oligarch,
right?
Amazon. So that's a problem in and of itself.
Now, Republican insiders tell Newsmax that Leader McCarthy is working to make sure that Stefanik is the only challenger Cheney has, in part because McCarthy apparently thinks that he can control Stefanik. Now, it's unclear if Stefanik will prevail, but what's becoming increasingly clear, Liz Cheney will not. Alison, back to you.
All right, Logan Raddick, thank you very much.
And as you heard there, Pennsylvania Congressman Guy Reschenthaler has been leading that charge to get New York Representative Liz Stefanik to replace House Republican Conference Chair Liz Cheney. Congressman joins us now live on this show, National Report. And Congressman, always good to see you making headlines, quite the headlines these days. A lot of questions for you. Before I get to Representative Stefanik, I think I want to ask you the question that's not being asked. How does this vote work? How many people vote on this? When does this vote happen?
Well, Shaun, first, thanks for having me on. Always enjoy it. As always, just call me Guy. But the procedure for how this works is next week when the Republican conference goes into our weekly meeting, there will be a resolution brought forward to vacate the chair. So basically a motion to remove Liz Cheney as the chairwoman. I believe that vote will pass overwhelmingly. Liz's support has dwindled to a very small amount within the conference. And then there will be a nomination for Liz Stefanik and whoever else wants to run. But at this point, it looks like Liz Stefanik has the votes to win overwhelmingly. And then Liz Stefanik will come in as the new conference chairwoman. And I should say this, a lot of people don't understand what the conference chair does. There's two big functions. The minor function is to actually run the conference meetings and to preside over the conference. But the major role of a conference chair is to be the spokesperson for the Republican caucus in Congress, to message, to put together the talking points, the messaging, and to be out there. Whenever Liz has messaged, it's always been about the past. It's been about the events leading up to Biden's inauguration. It's been about the Trump campaign in 2020. And it's been this personal animosity against the president and, by extension, his supporters. We're not going to win in 22 if we keep looking in the rearview mirror. That's why we need Liz who's focused on attacking Democrats and the far left agenda of Joe Biden, not attacking fellow conservatives.
Well, let me ask you about that for Republican voters, because you highlight how important, how crucial this role is. So a lot of folks want to know, Congresswoman Stefanik, getting Cheney out, putting Stefanik in, can they depend on her? There's this term being used called a rhino, Republicans in name only. Can they trust Stefanik, and why?
Well, I can tell you, I got in Congress in 2018, and most of that time was spent simultaneously defending Trump and attacking the Democrat agenda. And I can tell you that one of my key allies, one of my strongest allies in my fight against impeachment and in my fight against Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi has been Elise Stefanik. That's why I'm a champion of Elise's, and I think that she needs to take this position. But if you look at somebody who can articulate a message, it's Elise Stefanik. If you look at somebody who's focused on winning seats in messaging against Democrats, it's Elise Stefanik. And remember, she is a prolific fundraiser. She's a prolific recruiter. One of the reasons why we picked up so many seats in the last election is because of Elise Stefanik. And for those reasons, for Elise's merits, she's the right person for this job, and she will excel in this position.
Well, what happened earlier here on Twitter, I want to show you this. The Congresswoman, Stefanik, wrote this. She said, quote, "Big tech on the move. Twitter just suspended my communications director. An unconstitutional overreach silencing our voices and freedom of speech. Republicans are united in fighting back against big tech's tyranny. Millions of Americans will not be silenced." This coming amidst the president, or the former president, I should say, launching his own website with tweet-like messaging on it. Now you're seeing, because he was silenced on Twitter, now, according to Stefanik, you're seeing the same thing happen to what potentially could be the number 3 in the Republican Party. Your reaction?
Well, it's a badge of honor. I personally have been shadow banned by big tech. My messages do not have the reach that they once had. Of course, President Trump has been kicked off Facebook and Twitter. And the fact that Elise has now been suspended, her comms director has been suspended, that's a badge of honor. It shows you that Elise is a true conservative that's taking the fight to the woke yuppies and the liberal progressives. So I'd wear that with pride. Now, secondly, when it comes to big tech, it is very clear that they are out of control. And when the Republicans take control of the House and Senate in 22, we're coming after big tech. Because the fact that you have some woke liberal CEOs that are sitting in Silicon Valley and Seattle kicking the former leader of the free world off the social media platform is absolutely unacceptable. We need to regulate big tech and social media, just like the phone companies, because it should be regulated as a PUC. We also should break up big tech. You're now at a position where they have such a market share that startups, they don't want to compete against these big players. They just want to be purchased by the big players. That is a market distortion, and we should go back to the days of Teddy Roosevelt and bust these trusts. And additionally, like Ron DeSantis is doing in Florida, we need to adopt a position where people own their own search history. People own the data they're putting into big tech, and they can shut off the algorithms or turn them back on. But these woke yuppies that are in charge of big tech have more in common with the Chinese Communist Party than they do with everyday Americans. And they've woken the sleeping giant that's the Republican base.
Let me get final comments from you. I want to get back to Cheney because her recent op-ed has a lot of folks talking. You flip the channel to another cable news network. It's running their top story right now. Before I do that, here's the president making a comment about his view, the former president, here on the Cheney situation. Here's that.
Seems as though the Republican Party is trying to identify what it stands for. And they're in the midst of a significant sort of mini revolution.
Current president, just correct myself there, a mini revolution. She also goes on to say, though, in her op-ed, the GOP is at a turning point, and she talks about the dangers of Trump's claims. Again, the GOP party at a turning point. In her recent op-ed, is that true?
Well, the turning point is with Liz Cheney herself. I think that she is, to use a psychological term, she's projecting her own issues with the president and with the MAGA agenda. She's projecting that on the Republican Party. I'm sorry, but your internal struggle with the way that the party is heading is your issue. It's not an issue for the rest of us, and that's why we need to change. We're not going to win in 22. We're not going to win the presidency in 24 if we're looking through a lens from 2004. If we're talking about the past, we need to look forward. And as far as Joe Biden commenting on what's going on in the Republican conference, Joe Biden, you worry about the country. We're going to deal with the Republican conference internally as Republicans in the House. How about instead of opining on what's going on with us, you focus on the border crisis. You focus on Russia amassing troops in the Ukraine. You focus on China flying over Taiwan. There's a myriad of issues, disasters that have been caused by his weakness. Maybe he should focus on those issues and not on internal Republican conference politics.
Tough words there by the Congressman of Pennsylvania. Congressman, always good to see you. Congressman Guy Reschenthaler. Guy.
Likewise, Shaun.
I appreciate you coming on. Good to see you.
As House Republicans gain ground to oust House Republican Conference Chair Liz Cheney, President Trump had some strong words to say, he said in a statement. And meantime, here is the statement. Liz Cheney is a warmongering fool who has no business in Republican Party leadership. We want leaders who believe in the Make America Great Again movement and prioritize the values of America first. First, Elise Stefanik, a far superior choice, and she has my complete and total endorsement for GOP conference chair. Elise is a tough and smart communicator, end quote. Now, the big question on everyone's mind is, will New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik replace Liz Cheney, and can the GOP count on her to continue the movement, and will she be loyal to the party? Joining us now to discuss is Congressman Byron Donalds out of Florida's 19th congressional district. Sir, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Are there any major takeaways from what, we're seeing with Liz Cheney and Trump's statement? I mean, what do you think? Do you think that she, has the backing and she can be trusted and loyal to the Republican Party?
Well, first of all, I think the number one thing we take from this entire episode is that if you're going to be in Republican leadership, you have a duty to the members of the conference. It's just not the members of the conference choosing to follow you. You have a responsibility to follow us. And what Liz Cheney's done over the last several months is frankly be one of the biggest distractions in our party that we simply don't need. Our focus needs to be on what Joe Biden is doing to America, the radical policies of the left that your previous guest was actually saying quite well, Representative Reschenthaler. That needs to be our focus. Liz has been a distraction. That's why she needs to go. I think Elise is a good pick. I'll be supporting Elise. But what we need to be doing is being focused on the disastrous policies of Joe Biden and the Democrats and how that's impacting America.
Yeah, I know a lot of people agree. You're in Florida. I've been in Florida multiple times. Governor DeSantis lifting all COVID restrictions and mandates. But, the governor, he's getting a lot of flack about this. Your state has been, so advanced. Restaurants are open. Businesses are open. But, of course, the mainstream media, saying that he shouldn't be doing this. What are your thoughts?
I don't listen to the mainstream media because they've proven to be wrong every single time when it comes to reopening our economy and, frankly, getting back to life. Ron DeSantis has not just been the best governor of Florida, he's been the best governor in the country for that matter. He has shown that you can actually manage a pandemic and get kids back in school and reopen so people can run their lives and go and make a living for themselves without needing government to get in there and take care of every little thing. The mainstream media, if they knew better, if they actually followed science, they would realize that Florida's numbers are frankly better than California's, better than New York's, and we've had a far growing economy. And frankly, Andrew Cuomo's been the best realtor the state of Florida has ever seen because so many New Yorkers have been moving to Florida in record numbers because of their disastrous handling of the pandemic in the state of New York.
Yeah, a lot of people say that other states should follow your state. I want to move on, sir, to police reform. So the White House had this to say about police reform during a press conference. Take a listen.
Though this puts police reform in some regard ahead of the negotiations, one would think, for the American Families Plan, the infrastructure plan, which he set an end of the summer deadline for. Is this now the president's top priority? Does he want Congress to tackle this first?
Well, I would say that the president believes Congress can and should move forward with multiple policies at the same time. And certainly that is what is happening on Capitol Hill. Those members who are playing central roles in these negotiations, and obviously they can speak to the frequency of the discussions and the status of them, and we defer to them. They will be important participants, of course, in any outcome of negotiations around the American Jobs Plan, but those negotiations can happen simultaneously.
Just finally.
Simultaneously?
Look, I think when it comes to police reform, there's a lot of things that actually have broad support. frankly, there was all the elements in Tim Scott's bill from last Congress. The issue is that the left wants to get into this issue of qualified immunity. Frankly, they want to get rid of qualified immunity. And what that will do, it'll mean less officers on the street. Because what person trying to sign up for law enforcement is going to put themselves financially liable on a personal level and their families for any particular altercation that might occur in any interaction between law enforcement and an individual in the United States?
Yeah,
they're simply not going to do it. And so I think that that's the path forward, is you got to leave qualified immunity alone. Law enforcement officers need that protection because of everything they have to do on the job every single day. But if you want to talk about reforms and holds, if you want to talk about de-escalation techniques, I think that's where Congress should stand and no more.
Yeah, no, a lot of people agree with you. I want to get to your new legislation to protect small business for construction contracts. Can you tell us a little bit about that? We have about 30 seconds.
Sure. Listen, what all this does is make sure that small businesses have a seat at the table. They're not going to be essentially excluded because of their size. We want to make sure that they have accesses to not just contracts and ability to execute those contracts that deal with the federal government, but frankly have an opportunity to succeed in America. Really that simple. We want to make sure small businesses thrive no matter where they are, no matter who runs them. They deserve an equal shot too.
Yeah, so important for those small businesses. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Congressman Byron. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Have a good day.
I think also saying, as has been done in many parts of the country, it's a day to think about history and honor Indigenous people as well. I agree with that, too. So the process wasn't right, but the end result is going to be a day to honor Italian-American heritage, a day to honor Indigenous peoples. I think that's a good way forward.
Okay, that was de Blasio. Governor Cuomo disagrees. Here's that.
I support an Indigenous peoples holiday, but I also support Columbus Day. And you can have an Indigenous Peoples Day without intruding on Columbus Day. And that is the spirit of New York.
Again, so these changes are in New York, if you're wondering. Obviously, that's the discussion. You've got the governor of New York. You've got the mayor of the biggest city in our country. What I gather out of that is these guys don't agree on anything.
No, because this was just one of how many things that they disagree on?
Well, I think about the reopening. You had Mayor de Blasio coming out talking about New York City, which many know has been under strict lockdowns, saying, hey, we're going to try to open up. I believe the date was by June, sometime in June, or beginning of June. But that's got to be up to the governor of the state. The governor of the state comes forward and says, actually, you know what, we can do it sooner. It's May 19th. It doesn't matter. If he says the sky is blue, the other one's going to say it's not.
Yeah, I think that they both just come up with decisions based on what the other one says, as long as it's opposite. They just want to disagree.
I think bottom line, well, people just want a day off. So you can call it whatever you want. Am I getting the day off? Go to your employer and find out.
Quite frankly, I'm not going outside until I know everybody outside has had the shot. So I'm going to be wearing my mask probably, into my 90s.
Okay. I want to talk from a medical perspective on that. Is that safe, staying in a mask until you're 90 or until every single American is vaccinated, which, by the way, you're not going to get to? Your thoughts on people, because there are people that do think that.
I know. And, this isn't the first dumb thing that she said, and I'm sure it's not going to be the last dumb thing that she said. I can only hope that she's changing her mask for the next however many years that is until she's 90 and not wearing the same one. But, do I think that we're going to get out of this and not have to wear masks all the time? Absolutely. I mean, that was the point of vaccination. So, my 13-year-old son asked me that the other day. He said, Daddy, when can I stop wearing these stupid masks? The vaccine's out there. People are getting vaccinated. And I said, that's a really good question. And I think we should be able to stop wearing masks. That being said, I think, you look to the Asian countries, and for the last however many years during cold and flu season, they're always wearing surgical face masks. And I think that there's good data for that. And that makes a lot of sense. So I think when in the cold and flu season, we probably should be wearing masks, but that's a personal choice. That can't be mandated by the government. That should be up to you. And if Whoopi Goldberg wants to wear a mask for the rest of her life and stay indoors, go for it. That's entirely her choice. I applaud it. And I say, great for Whoopi. I just hope that means we don't have to listen to her so much on TV and see her face as much, because she says a lot of dumb things. And I know she's trying to encourage other people to follow her And I don't think that that's a wise thing. But if it's her choice, go for it.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney responding to calls from members of her own party to be stripped of her title as chair of the House Republican Conference.
And a new opinion piece for the Washington Post. Cheney argues, quote, the Republican Party is at a turning point and Republicans must decide whether we're going to choose truth and fidelity to the Constitution. America First members of Congress have never been Cheney's fans. And now, in the wake of her Twitter feud with President Trump, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is on board to remove her.
All right, for a look at whether she's going to retain her position leading the GOP conference, let's welcome in our panelists. Today we have John Fleming, former Republican congressman from Louisiana and a former assistant to President Trump. Mark Halpern joining us, political analyst as well, joining us live here on National Report, as well as Rebecca Walzer, a tax attorney and president of Walzer Wealth Management. Thank you all for being here today. John, I'll start with you. The momentum certainly moving against Cheney here. Word is other than the opinion piece, she's not even fighting this. Is this a foregone conclusion? Is that how you see it? It's a done deal.
It's all but a done deal. I'm hearing from members. Widespread reporting across the country, even in her own district. She's way upside down there. And really, this goes back to the fact that there's been leadership in the Republican Party for many years that talks in a conservative way, but doesn't act that way. And Donald Trump came in and he changed all that. He's a true north when it comes to the Republican Party. And there are still people within the Republican Party who want to push things back to the way they used to be. And we're never going back there. And that's the struggle that we're going through right now.
Rebecca, it seems in the op-ed she talks a lot about the past instead of talking about the future. And I wanted to get your take on this. Kevin McCarthy, he was not always on board with removing Cheney. Just a couple of weeks ago, he said he would not lose her post for voting to impeach President Trump. But he clearly changed his mind. Here's some leaked audio of Kevin McCarthy talking about Cheney.
I think she's got real problems. I've had it with it's, I've lost confidence.
So, Rebecca, he's kind of gone back and forth on this.
Yes, absolutely, Alison. And the thing is, I will just say I agree with Liz Cheney that the Republican Party is at a turning point, because I think what Americans have realized through the last 18 months, through the virus, through the election, is that we really have a uniparty. We have a lot of Republicans that vote and go along with a lot of Democratic, important platforms. And there's a lot of conservatives out there that are saying, you guys aren't listening to us. You are not representing what we feel. And I think Liz Cheney gets one thing wrong. She thinks that the Republican Party is behind Donald Trump because of Donald Trump. And I completely disagree. Conservatives, Republicans, African Americans that are on the Democratic side, they came together to create one of the largest coalitions behind President Trump because he stood for the Constitution. He wasn't about calling evil good and good evil, which we are seeing so much today in BLM and Antifa. We can cover riots, but all we want to talk about is January 6th. And the American people can see through that, and so can the Republicans.
That's a valid point. There's a lot of you take a pot of January 6th and you kind of just place everyone you want in there, and then there you go and you label it and you're like, how can you vote for this? Because now you're supporting January 6th riots. And it's way more complex than that. A lot of talk is who's going to replace Cheney, John. Who's going to take that number 3 spot when the vote does come down. We've had Congressman Guy Reschenthaler pushing for Elise Stefanik of New York to take on that role. And again, you pose the question because some feel that Cheney's not conservative enough. How much do we know about Representative Elise Stefanik and her conservative values based on what you know or what you've heard on Stefanik?
Yeah, the inside word is Stefanik is going to be taking that position. And while her voting record maybe is not as conservative as Cheney's, there's a reason for that. She comes from New York. It's very hard to win elections in New York and vote very conservative. However, as you may recall, she was a strong defender of President Trump when he was being attacked falsely for the Russia hoax and the impeachment and all those things. So I think it's all but a foregone conclusion that Elise will be the next person in that position.
All right, let's bring in Mark Halperin. Mark, we've been talking about Liz Cheney and then obviously Elise Stefanik, and some people are questioning: is Stefanik, conservative enough? Will she back the party? Can conservatives count on her? What do you think?
Her own views. It's her job to express the views of all the Republicans in the House, find the consensus, and help them spread the message. That's something that a lot of members now are not comfortable with Liz Cheney doing, because Liz Cheney's put such a focus on positions about President Trump that are not the consensus view, to say the least. I think overall, what the party wants to do with this change is move towards consensus on how to critique the Biden administration and Nancy Pelosi, rather than fighting amongst themselves. And this is a way, potentially at least, to get some peace within the conference.
Mark, let me actually go back to you on this, because Rebecca made this point about the Washington Post op-ed that Cheney put out about a turning point for the GOP. Is there some truth in that?
Well, look, there's a large part of the Republican Party that thinks continuing to align with President Trump so closely in the midterms and potentially in 2024 is a huge mistake. It's mostly the establishment of the party, which has not been very dominant during the Trump years. But Liz Cheney is speaking for a not insignificant amount of people, members of Congress, some governors, some of the big donors, some grassroots support that says we can't keep fighting ourselves or conducting these fights tethered to Donald Trump. That's not the dominant view amongst House Republicans. It's certainly not the dominant view amongst Republicans around the country.
All right, a lot to talk about. We will certainly be talking about this for a little bit. John Fleming, Rebecca Walsner, and Mark Halperin.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, where real news for real people.